So I imagine people can hear me. I think we'll hit the road. And good evening, everyone. My name is Alan Freedman. I'm the Vice President of the Australian Jewish Association, and I am your MC for this evening. And for those who are familiar with that introductory music that I just played, I'm joined by Michael Burd, my former co-host of Nothing Left. Good evening, Michael. It's nice to have the old team back again, even if it's just for tonight.
Yes, good evening, Alan. It's been a while. It's been a long time between drinks, that's for sure.
It is. Also visible on your screens are David Adler, the President of the AJA, and Ted Lapkin, our Executive Director. Good evening to you as well. Our guest this evening is no stranger to Australian audiences. We will formally introduce him in a moment, but good evening or good afternoon to you in Israel, Arnold Roth, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Alan. Good to be here.
I am assuming that Arnold's story will be somewhat well known to our audience tonight, and the topic of this evening's chat is to find out the latest information on his unfortunately long journey to bring a Palestinian Arab terrorist to justice. The format tonight will be much the same as before. Michael and I will chat with Arnold for about 30 minutes, after which we will open up the discussion with a live Q&A session from the audience. The chat function is available for general comments, so feel free to send messages to the audience during the discussion. For those who are not sure how to use this, clicking the chat icon in the middle of the toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom screen will open up the chat window. Now, I've muted everybody, almost everybody to start with, and can I please ask you all to make sure that you keep yourself muted, as one of the difficulties with a Zoom event is that it can be very distracting to the group when there are background noises if your microphone remains on. Okay, let's get started. Over to you, Michael.
Yes, thanks, Alan. Now, Jerusalem-based, Melbourne-born Arnold Roth, a lawyer by trade, immigrated to Israel with his family over 30 years ago. Arnold's involved in Israel's emerging technology industry. He spends most of his time now devoted to advocacy for special needs children with his wife, Freedman, and Israel advocacy. About 19 years ago, Arnold's then 15-year-old daughter, Malki, and a friend like many young kids visited a local Jerusalem pizza parlor when a Palestinian suicide bomber came in, sat down and blew himself up, along with Malki and approximately 13 other people, women and children. The Palestinian family of the murderer and plotters, in particular, the suicide bomber's female accomplice, Ilham al-Tamimi, are well known ever since Arnold has been trying to get justice. Arnold has established the Malki Foundation, honouring the memory of their murdered daughter. Arnold's excellent articles can be found in the Jerusalem Post and many other well-known media outlets. Just Google Arnold Roth, as well as his two blogs, the Malki Foundation and This Ongoing War, one word. Arnold, by way of providing some background information, could you start by telling us about Ilham Tamimi, the person who was one of the key people in the Sbarro bombing? Who is she, and what role did she play in the events of 9th of August 2001?
There are many different versions to the reality that I'm going to describe, and I'm only going to give the version that I know, but I'm pretty sure that I'm right and most of the reports that you've read are wrong. Ahlam Tamimi, Ahlam is similar to the word in Hebrew, chalamot, chalam, dream, so she's, her name really means dreams. Was born in Jordan to a family that is well established in Jordan, though they claim to be Palestinian, like 80% of Jordanians. Had a regular upbringing in Jordan, which ended more or less at the point, and you won't have read this anywhere, where she became pregnant outside of marriage and as the ethical requirements of the society in which she was living require. She was supposed to be put to death by her parents. They worked out a plan B, and that involved her moving to the West Bank, where she began to study journalism at one of the universities. We're talking of a very short period before she engaged in the act of terrorism that has turned the life of my family upside down. So we're speaking in 1999 or 2000 or possibly even 2001. But in functional terms, what happened is that she gave expression to the deep bigotry which runs right through her clan, anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli, and joined Fatah. She didn't find herself in Fatah and was then induced to join Hamas. And because she was a student of journalism, and there were certain privileges that at least potentially accrued to somebody doing that, she became attractive to the Hamas people, who made her the first female admitted into the ranks of the terrorists of that organization. She carried out a terrorist attack in the center of Jerusalem, a building that many of you will know, a week or 10 days before what she did at the Sbarro pizzeria, which was in the center of town. And the building I'm talking about is called Hamashpil Tzarchan. It used to be the main department store in town. Today it's been, over the last couple of years, converted. It doesn't matter, it's no longer what it was, but it had a supermarket in the basement, and equipped with an exploding beer can. She walked in there like a shopper, placed it on the shelf, and left. There are two versions of what happened next. The version that she has given to every audience, every Arab audience, has been that she caused the building to collapse with colossal loss of life among the Zionists. But because the Israelis are such sons of devils, they hid all of this, and you won't read about it. Of course, the reality is that the bomb fizzled, and she was enraged by this and gave a message back to the people who had sent her to say that if I'm going to do this for you again, you're going to have to give me something that has a real explosive to it. And that's how it came to be that on the 9th of August 2001, she was handed an exploding guitar case. There was no guitar inside, filled with shrapnel nails. I have to say, I used to have some of those nails on my desk as a constant reminder. They've gotten lost. Nails, bolts, pieces of shrapnel, and a lot of explosive. Those pieces that I had were embedded in Malki's telephone when we were given that back by the police. It had a ballistic cover to it to protect it from all possible harm. It didn't really work, and so we ended up in possession of some of those pieces of shrapnel. She wasn't the accomplice. She wasn't the organizer. She was the bomber. People often want to say, and Michael, this is not picking on you, everybody does what you just did, say that she accompanied the bomber. No, she accompanied a young man made mad with religious zeal only a relatively short time before this happened. And he was the bomb. He was the human bomb. He was carrying an empty guitar case that wasn't empty completely. It didn't have a guitar, but it had what I've just described. And he came there knowing that he was going to walk into the center of the intersection at the corner of King George and Jaffa Road and blow himself up. Those were the instructions. So he was the bomb and she was the bomber. As it turned out, he disobeyed the instructions, presumably because of an excessive desire to do even more harm, and noticed after she left him in the middle of that intersection that there were more people, and in particular children, behind the glass curtain wall of the Sbarro pizzeria, which was right on that intersection. It's no longer there. And he walked in there. That wasn't the plan, but that's what he did. By then she was 10 minutes away, and she fled for her life. She had no interest in dying for the revolution or committing herself any more than she'd already committed herself. And she was on a bus riding back to Ramallah from Shar Shechem, the Damascus Gate, which is one of the main commercial areas in the Arab parts of Jerusalem. She was on her way back to Ramallah. And she's described graphically what happened on that ride back, where at first she was horrified at the knowledge that he had blown up inside the restaurant, contrary to the instructions, and there were reports that 3 people were killed. And she says openly on TV, for the record, I was disappointed when I heard that there were only 3 people killed, but as she and the other passengers in this, actually I think it was probably a sheriff taxi, are listening to the radio, they hear that the death toll is climbing. The mood inside the taxi starts skyrocketing, and then they run into a group of Palestinian policemen after the Kalandia crossing, which means they've left Jerusalem, and the policemen celebrate with them. Everybody's in a state of celebration. To very quickly wrap up the rest of that story, some couple of weeks later, she was handed over to the Israelis by some informers in the Ramallah area, was put in prison, on remand, put on trial, tried and convicted. We had no knowledge of any of those steps, none whatsoever. And one of the constants, one of the really embittering dimensions to our experience here is that we've really been kept in the dark at every step. This has all sorts of consequences, but I simply mention it now so that I can say I've got that off my chest. I know personally I'm going to finish this in a moment. I know a great deal about what happened at the trial, but it's got nothing to do with the authorities. Somebody phoned me anonymously after the trial was over, never identified himself, invited me to meet him at a certain location, which I did, handed me a bundle of papers, and that's how I have the protocol and the sentencing documents, which otherwise I wouldn't have gotten. In fact, none of the families affected in this way were. And from there, we began to get a picture of what had been done to our child.
Arnold, look, 19 years is a long time since that day, which, as you say, turned your world upside down. Can you give us a little snapshot of some of the milestone events or dates that have been significant along this journey of yours?
There aren't that many, Alan, as I guess you know. In the 3rd week of October 2011, the government of Israel announced and then executed a plan to release 1,027 terrorists without telling the public that more than half of those terrorists were in fact murderers with, as Israelis like to say, or don't like to say, blood on their hands. This was never stated, but it's the fact. I've got the complete list. The day after she walked free, she was in Cairo to a gala reception that was heavily publicized in their world. She was then flown, the only one of the Shalit deal beneficiaries to be flown from there as a celebrity traveler to Jordan, and was received in a rapturous reception there, first at the airport and then in the official government law court. The next major event is that, and I'm skipping a lot of detail here because you've told me, Alan, that we only have 4.5 hours to get this story across, and I've learned how to keep my story brief. She got married. Circumstances of her marriage are particularly galling, and I'm not going to dwell on them. At roughly the same time, a little before it, I went to Washington. Good things happened there in my interaction with the officials in the Department of Justice and the FBI. I came home telling my wife that we were in for a hard few weeks while the pursuit of this woman would go ahead, and that we wouldn't be updated because that's the way the DOJ, the Department of Justice, works. And I was right. It was a good few weeks, 5 years, with absolutely no update. But at the end, there was an update, and the update was, we're announcing this afternoon federal terrorism charges against this woman. We were told that here in Jerusalem by the American officials. She's being added to the FBI most wanted terrorists list. And just by the way, we've been trying to get her extradited, but we haven't really succeeded. So, and then there's a lot of detail, which I'm going to skip here.
Arnold, why America? What was America's involvement in all of this?
America's involvement is very concrete and specific. There's no country in the world that presumes to prosecute people outside its own physical jurisdiction, its own territory, unless it has some territorial nexus or some other nexus to the crime. Not the United States, and not in the area of terrorism. So the United States has had for years a very accommodating regime of prosecution, where if it's an American victim and the act is terrorism, the United States reserves to itself the privilege of declaring the whole world as its jurisdiction, and not only will go after them, but must go after them. Having said all of those nice words, the United States, at the point where I went to the Department of Justice, had never done this once in the case of an act of terrorism done in Israel to citizens of the United States. And lo aleinu, there are a lot of American victims who have been killed in acts of terrorism here in this country, but none of them had ever followed the track that Freedman and I decided we were going to go down. Malki had American citizenship. She was born in Melbourne in 1985, so she had Australian citizenship. We gave her American citizenship, as we did to all of our children, by registering her birth. And then in Israel, she became an Israeli by the operation of the law of return. It really only became an issue for us once we pulled ourselves together after the massive trauma, the unforgivable insult of the Shalit deal, a catastrophe for the Jewish people in every respect. We soon realized that we had privileged rights, and we decided that we would exercise those privileged rights, and that's why I went to Washington. And the process since then, which has involved lots of interaction with the American authorities, all derives from the fact that the victim was American. There was another young woman who was also an American and also murdered that day. We've become very close with her parents, though they were then living in Los Angeles. It was their only child. She was pregnant with her first child. And then there's another young woman who was there with her 2-year-old little girl. She's also an American, but you never hear about her because she's not dead. She's only unconscious. She's been unconscious now for 19 years. There's lots of human tragedy in this story. It rarely gets into the media. The media, in general, are interested in the broad brush approach. And in the broad brush approach, this is a story about Ahlam Tamimi and the way she has been celebrated and protected by the Jordanians.
Arnold, most people would have given up after 20 years. What's kept you and your wife from it going?
Michael, it's a terrific question. And as usual, I find myself having to say that my answer will not be anywhere near as good as what you just asked. It doesn't feel like we've had to keep making the decision again and again. It just seems to us with the unending sense of loss of not having Malki with us, the middle child in our family, 4th child out of 7, just a wonderful soul. It seems to us that this is all we can do, and if it's something which we can do, then of course we're going to do it. I don't remember any discussion with Freedman, who's sitting in the next room reading to our grandchildren at the moment, where we said to ourselves, should we really go on? It's not really the way we're even thinking about this. So thanks for making it seem like it's a big deal, Michael, but it's really not. When this woman is in handcuffs and being walked away to a penitentiary in the United States, we'll stop there.
Arnold, Ahlam Tamimi is currently living freely in Jordan, and you've spent the last few years trying to get her extradited. Now, there's been some recent developments. Would you like to tell us what's been happening?
Well, the background is the developments that didn't happen. When the American authorities told us that they're announcing charges 3 hours from now in Washington, and we were sitting in a hotel room in Jerusalem, they told us only half the story. The other half of the story was that it was going to be very difficult to overcome certain institutional resistance within the government of the United States to seeing her arrested and prosecuted. I'm not going to take this opportunity to deal in the detail of that. And I'll only justify that by saying it's a really serious discussion and liable to be misunderstood without getting into the detail. And we won't have that opportunity here because for those who missed the point, we're not really meeting here for 4.5 hours today. So what was clear to us was that we were not in a regular legal or conventional extradition channel. We never have been. This has always been about trying to address via public opinion, by the media, by political pressure, by grassroots pressure, the resistance that exists to seeing her prosecuted. And without going to the details, I'll tell you that that resistance is on show in at least 3 countries, in the United States, in Israel, and in Jordan. So none of this is simple. Once you internalize the fact that our fate as bereaved parents who really are, and it's not just a figure of speech, living a life that was turned upside down by Malki's murder, we're left to try to persuade people who have legal obligations to do the things that we want, to do them and to stop coming up with reasons not to do them. So more in the direction of answering your question, Alan, it took, first of all, 5 years from the time that I sat in Washington with all of those big shots to the day that the charges were unveiled. So that brings us to March 2017. March 2017, some fabulous speeches were delivered in Washington by the top echelon of officials in the Department of Justice. They've all moved on. There's not one of them who will answer any of my questions today, and none of the things that they said have been carried through. The key developments are that throughout this period, the Jordanians have said, what do you want from us? We can't possibly, given our constitution, hand this woman over, because given our constitution, this is constitutionally illegal. We can't hand over a Jordanian citizen for extradition. Every single word I just used is a lie. And as you might intuit, it's not so easy to be telling people who live in a system which is built on fairy tales and fabrications like that, that actually you can see through it. So it all involves careful treading. We keep running into people who are 100% on our side. Just ask them, they'll tell you, we're 100% with you, Mr. Roth. And then you spend the next year or 2 years trying to undo the damage that the person who is 100% with you is actually doing without saying a word about it. But things are moving today. In October or November of last year, 2019, the United States, for the very first time, said in an official fashion, well, the Jordanians may say there's no extradition treaty between us, but actually there is. That took almost 3 years to get done. In the months since then, there's quite a lot that's happened. The most important, and I'm going to stop babbling on at this point, is that in December, by a process that really I'll need to write a book about, a law appeared on the Book of Statutes of the United States in the context of the 2020 budget. A law which was signed by the US President on the 20th of December, which says, without mentioning the name Jordan, if a country has an extradition treaty with the United States and denies its obligations under the treaty with the United States and gets foreign aid up the wazoo from the United States, then the United States says you can't have that money anymore. Now that's the short and dramatic way of saying what that law says, but it is a dramatic story. There is now a law which gives us a big stick, and trust me, we are now using that big stick. So it hasn't moved in a straight line or quickly. In fact, most of the action, and maybe Alan, David, and Michael, you guys are responsible for this. It's all been in the last couple of days in anticipation of our having this Zoom event. Very prescient of you. What's happened is that the media in Jordan have gone insane. And that stems from something else that I haven't mentioned now, in which good people, and I'm one of them, persuaded some Republican members of the House of Representatives, the lower half of the US Congress, to sign on to a letter addressed to Her Excellency Dina Kawar, the ambassador of Jordan in Washington. And that letter, which follows pretty much the form of a letter I sent her last year, which of course she threw straight in the garbage and never acknowledged, says, well, it doesn't matter what it says. The letter is a matter of public record, and I'll refer you to copies of it. But it's an uncomfortable letter from their point of view. And that letter has now been picked up against all the odds, against all the experience we've had, being picked up by the Jewish media and to a certain extent by the not so Jewish media. That hasn't happened in our experience. We really are the victims of our story being suppressed at almost every turn. Not this time. So it's now small-time news in the West that a number of congressmen have sent this letter to the Jordanian ambassador, who cares, and very, very big news in the Arab world. And in fact, I was up almost all night last night, just collating and then writing about the Arab reaction. Things are really on the move and have been for the last 48 hours.
Mm. And is something likely to happen here, Arnold? I mean, is America likely to actually do anything? I know you hope they do.
Right. So I don't know. There are good signs and there are not so good signs, as there have been all along. It doesn't really matter. Our task, we're just pushing ahead with our heads down, and we will continue to do that until we either fail or get to the result we want. I think that the chances now are better than they've been at any stage in the past. More to the point, I don't want to make too much of this. I'll say it anyway. More to the point, we really are getting our message across to the Arab media market in general, to the Jordanians in particular, and to the Tamimi clan very specifically. Ahlam Tamimi is she's a journalist, had her own TV program, as I'm sure many of you know, for about 5 years, filled with incitement and bigotry, unimpaired, no interference from the Jordanian government. And today, she's really nourished by the social media. And here, we've managed to knock off one after the other her Instagram account, her Facebook account, her Twitter accounts again and again, because it's like the American game of whack-a-mole. As soon as you see the head pop up, you give it a smack, it goes away, and then another one pops up in another place. So there are 3 more accounts that we've just reported to Facebook in the last few days, but we'll get those eventually as well. And that can't be comfortable for them. Last night, for the first time ever, something called the Tamimi clan issued a press release in its own name, warning Jordanians that they have to be vigilant and that they need to be standing up with this national hero. And we're waiting to see where that takes us. It's really a whole new chapter.
Arnold, you mentioned the relations between America and Jordan. When Jordan signed the peace treaty with Israel, the year escapes me, but America has been paying Jordan $1 billion per year ever since then as a reward. Similarly, they give Egypt $3 billion a year. But the fact that Jordan refuses to send Tamimi back to Israel or America, it really, does that show us how fragile and shallow the so-called peace treaty with Israel really is?
No, I honest to goodness think that the 2 are different issues. You could ask the question a different way and say, would any person in their right mind trust the Jordanians, and why is Israel trusting them so much? And I'd say, beyond me, I have no idea. The Jordanians haven't made the kind of killing that you've described through all the years, and it's really only been the last few years where very serious money has been allocated to them. And they're now number 3 in the league table for countries receiving foreign aid from the United States. Number 3, that's really saying something for a tiny little country. It's out of all proportion. There's something seriously wrong. No one can make the argument that Jordan is free of corruption. As much as the king speaks with a faintly British accent, he's not a sweetheart. He has a lot of friends here, outside my door, in the United States, pretty much everywhere. He has friends. He's a popular guy. His ambassador is a popular person, but he's not a good guy. And the things that he's done are pretty hideous. And we're not trying, I'm not trying, my wife's not trying to insult the man in public, but he's certainly the address. I had a meeting with the figure here in Israel, a wonderful figure, I won't name him for now, who negotiated the peace treaty with Jordan in the 90s, 1994. And he said, don't waste your time talking to any of the officials there. In Jordan, it's only the king. And if the king isn't in the discussion, you haven't gotten anywhere. And it's pretty clear to us that that is the way it works, with all the claims about how it's a constitutional monarchy with a parliament and all sorts of democratic forces at work. It's just, you only have to look at it to see what's really going on. So, in answer to your question, I don't understand why, I hear the arguments, but I don't understand why Israel gives so much deference to the Jordanians. They have caused us endless problems here in the troubles on Har HaBayit and actually a long list of issues. The only argument that I hear that makes serious sense but isn't a complete answer is that we have a long border with them, and everybody would rather that the border stayed quiet. From there, I see very smart people reaching conclusions that I think are simply insupportable. As for the Americans, I'm, if anything, more troubled by it. Americans have a lot to be upset about in their relations with the Jordanians. I'll only mention one small aspect of this because it's so painful, and I'm sure you haven't heard of it, or most of you won't have heard of it. One of the people with whom I've had close contact over these last few years is the father of an American Green Beret. Green Berets are an elite force in the United States, and there are many Green Berets who are based in Jordan. Why are they based in Jordan? You're not allowed to ask. You're not allowed to talk about it. It's all somewhat under the table, and has a great deal to do with the fact that they're right next door to Iraq. But this father of this particular Green Beret had his life turned upside down when his son, the Green Beret, and two other Green Berets arrived back after a hard day's work on the job in their Air Force base in the desert of Jordan, and were shot to death by the guard at the entrance to the base. And they were told in quick order by the Jordanian authorities and by the American authorities, the boys misbehaved, they did something wrong, it's very unfortunate, it really wasn't anybody's fault. And then it was discovered that there was a camera that had recorded the whole thing, and to cut the story short, the video shows that they were the victims of a clear ambush. They were shot dead in cold blood. The Jordanians wanted to cover it up. There were people in the United States who also wanted to cover it up, but in the end, the perpetrator, within days of that video being released, was put on trial, convicted in a couple of hours, and is sentenced to jail. Nobody who lives through that, and I speak now on the basis of having conversations with one of the fathers, trusts the people that we're dealing with. There's no reason to trust. If you have to deal with the Jordanians, if you have to live with them, if you have to be nice to them when you go to a garden party in Canberra as a guest of the ambassador of Jordan in Australia, you've got to do all of those things. But, you know, Chabdeu v'chashdeu is a well-established Jewish doctrine which says, I'll be nice to you to the extent I need to be, but I'm going to be watching you the whole time. And that's really the right approach.
Alan, do you want to open it up now for questions?
I've got one more of my own, because it's such a fascinating story. Well, we'll do a couple of more questions, Michael, and then we'll open it up. Arnold, just going back to the congressional situation, and it's obviously good news that they're thinking about applying sanctions to Jordan. Has this been influenced by the fact that Donald Trump is the president and not Barack Obama? Would this have likely to have happened under President Obama?
Yes, I think just as likely, and I think the same problems would have arisen. I can't divide our experience between the Obama period and the Trump period. It's all been a battle with people who are doing their job, and every one of them is a big hero. And here we are still chasing the woman after so many years.
Arnold, my last question for you before we go to the audience. Has the Australian government shown any interest in this case whatsoever? Have they been any help? Have they shown any interest?
Yeah, first of all, yes, and that'll lead me to say something concrete. At a certain point, I got, said more bluntly, one of the members of parliament who's no longer there, who's a member of the Jewish faith, was instrumental in setting things up so that I was able to communicate with Malcolm Turnbull when he was the Prime Minister, and I got a pretty positive response from him. And then it all fell apart for reasons that I had no control over and that I deeply regret. We are now, as of Sunday of this week, organising a small group of friends in Melbourne and Sydney. Team Malki is the name that was given to it by one of the organisers, to try to get Australia, which really means putting this in front of the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, and the senior ministers, to use their good relations with the Jordanians to have them understand what catastrophically bad decisions they've been making. Australia has a uniquely good relationship with Jordan, better than almost any other country. And Australia plays it to the advantage of the Jordanians. In brackets, I'll just say that one of the most unpleasant periods for me was discovering that one of the most prestigious university-level institutions in Jordan, called the Jordan Media Institute, had the best and brightest journalism students in the Middle East, and they decided, because they're so clever, to nominate and celebrate Ahlam Tamimi as their success model. It was on every page of their website. I turned to all the governments that were funding the Jordan Media Institute, which only survives because of foreign funding. I got a third of them to stop their funding, and in that third, the United States and Australia were not included. Both of them, much more so the Australian, where I had a full and frank exchange of views with the then Australian ambassador in Amman, simply refused. So notwithstanding all of that, you've got to look at the positive side. I say that Australia has a voice in this, that it isn't just the Americans that we should be pressuring, and I'm hoping that in the nature of things, with Malki having been born in Melbourne, my family being well and truly rooted in the Melbourne community, me myself having left here only when I was already a professional and with 4 children in tow, we want the Australian government to step in and help justice be done. It's not favours, it's not special privileges, it's trying to get a callous, confessed murderer of children to be put where she belongs, in front of a judge and then eventually behind bars. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to get Australia on our side in that.
Okay, all right, thanks Arnold. We'll open it up to questions from the audience. So if you want to ask a question, just give me an electronic wave. So down at the bottom of your Zoom bar, you'll see an icon which says reactions. If you click that, you'll see a couple of little hand shapes. So if you just click one of those, that will turn up on the screen. And then when that happens, please unmute yourself and ask your questions. I've got to try and juggle a few screens here to see people's hands. So does anybody have any questions that they want to ask? I think Stephen Zamel, you can start off.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Hi Arnold, how are you? I'm just wondering, how does the Israeli justice system handle the balance of her sentence when she was swapped? Do they commute it? Is it outstanding? And if Israel can get her hands on it, does she have to go back to jail? How do they handle it?
You've stepped onto landmines. I'm going to give you the official answer and use this as an opportunity to say something I should have said earlier. I'm seeing lots of interesting comments here on the chat. I can't deal with them now, and I'm afraid that I won't be able to reach you. I'm going to give you an address. Anybody who wants to get into a discussion, questions that aren't discussed here today, thisongoingwar@gmail.com. Thisongoingwar@gmail.com. Now to your question. The Israeli government handled the Shalit deal as best it could. Nobody involved in it considers it to be a big victory. On the other hand, nobody, as far as I know, other than perhaps one individual, acknowledges that it was really it's a catastrophe. The dead Israelis who have resulted from that deal are the testament to that. Well, let me ask you what you think. Was it right to issue a pardon to all of these people?
Mm-hmm.
Was that a no or a yes?
No.
Okay, so
no way.
It's a trick question. Not one of them got a pardon. And there's not a single Australian media, not a single Israeli media channel that has ever said that. I have the documents. I know what went on. Every single one of these bastards was given a conditional commutation of sentence. If there are any Israelis here, hakala ba'onesh. These people didn't have their account wiped clean. They are as guilty and as liable as sin. And that's certainly true of my daughter's killer. the condition in her case was breached within minutes of her leaving the bus. But what does that mean in practice? In practice, I don't think anybody on the Israeli side has a great appetite to take steps to bring these people back into custody, with the exception that where there's some strategic advantage in holding on to some cluster of these people and then doing another deal, that might be useful. I say at every opportunity that this is a big mistake. I believe in the view that says you never do deals with terrorists. And I quote, and I can't do it now, I should have prepared the page. I quote the Dummy's Guide, that's what I call it, the Dummy's Guide to Being a Government Who Has to Deal with Terrorists. There's a terrific book, which was a bestseller back in the 90s, if anybody here is old enough to have been reading in the 1990s, a book which tells people what they need to know if they ever become the head of state and have to deal with the terrorists. And it says, chad v'chalak, absolutely clearly, you don't negotiate, you never do a deal. If you do a deal, you'll regret it for generations to come. Of course, you know that the book was written by Bibi Netanyahu, and at the very first test in his political career, he did the exact opposite. Now, leaving Bibi Netanyahu out of the conversation, it's clear what we ought to be doing. We should not be doing deals, so that holding terrorists in prison as a kind of a stockpile, a reserve for deals that are coming in the future, it's never worked very well in the past and it won't work in the future. It's morally completely defective and it leads to terrible outcomes. Coming back to the more concrete part of your answer, I don't see any will on the part of the Israeli government to require the released, the beneficiaries of the Shalit deal to complete their terms. Certainly not in the case of Tamimi, but I don't think in any other case. There are about 70 who are in prison now who have been rearrested, having been released in October 2011, and I don't think anybody really knows what the strategy is. But that's not where our solution is going to come from. The Israeli government, and I want to say this by picking my words very carefully, the Israeli government has not said or done one thing to help us, and we would be happy if they would just stop getting in the way.
Anybody else got a question? While you're thinking of it, you mentioned the government, Arnold. Israel's now seeing the birth of a unity government. Are you expecting any differences, particularly when Benny Gantz takes over the Prime Minister's office?
Alan, my friend, I'm not here to have a political discussion about any government and the parties in it, so I'm not going to answer that. I can only say that there's something depressing and distressing about the way the Israeli media won't touch this story. Many of you will have seen the terrific article, very sensitive article, that David Horowitz, the editor of the Times of Israel, wrote about us at the beginning of last week. You might have imagined that there would be a sudden opening of interest on the part of the media to tell the story. No one has any idea. It's not about the Tamimi pursuit, not about Freedman and Arnold Roth, about no aspect of this. I can't give you a good explanation for it. I could go into a lot of detail involving surprising people. We've had a lot of help, a small amount of help from Haaretz, and we've had an enormous amount of headache from Haaretz. So there's a lot of detail which you won't intuit and that I'm leaving on the side. But I'm not sure that we will ever look again at the Israeli government as a place where we want to actually go to for support and friendship. We're Zionists. We're pleased to be living here. We've never regretted for a day that we've brought our children here and they're building beautiful lives, and we have grandchildren, and it's all, we came here for a reason. That reason, it makes sense to us. That we're having heartache, tragedy, yes, I didn't want that. And I would like it to go away to the extent that it still can. But I don't think we're looking for political solutions here in Israel, whether it's the left, the right, or the in-between.
Okay, Terry Davis, Terry and Sue.
Hi, good evening. I just wanted to say that, in a way, I guess we empathise with you maybe more than most, because when that bomb went off, our daughter was in a shop immediately opposite. And what you've told us this evening as to where this terrorist wanted to explode the bomb, I can't imagine what would have happened if that had been the case. But I'm intrigued by the fact that especially the Israeli government, just doesn't seem to want to help. I mean, the common theme of Israeli governments for a long time is that when these people kill Jews, and especially kill them in Israel, they go out and get them. And I just can't understand why Israeli government after Israeli government hasn't in this case.
Difficult one.
You want me to answer that? Are you kidding?
No. Question.
You're absolutely right. I've heard that Israel is going to be appointing an ambassador in Canberra one of these years. Why don't you write a letter to the ambassador in Canberra and ask him? I've tried to speak to people. I know people up and down the Israeli government. I've done a lot of missions for the Prime Minister's office and for the Foreign Ministry. There's no shortage of addresses. There's just a shortage of answers. But go for it, please, and let me know what they say.
David Schulberg?
Isn't a big stumbling block, Arnold, the fact that the United States and Israel both want to preserve the current regime in Jordan?
100%, that's right. We ought to be asking ourselves, though, whether it's a rational decision and whether having them hand over a murderer who confesses to everything and has, without a doubt, an open and shut case waiting for her, whether that's the cross on which they want to be hung. This is absurd. If I were a dictator of an Arab country with all that comes with that, all of the privileges and pleasures, I don't know if I'd hang my career on the Ahlam Tamimi hat. I don't understand that at all. So yes, David, as usual, your assessment is 100% right, but the underlying question is, why would they ever want to do a crazy thing like this? So that's really our message at the moment. Is, are you really sure you want to do all of this damage?
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
Arnold, it's Alan Goldstone here. It's been a long time. How are you?
Hang on, I've got to find you. Oh, there you are, Alan. Good. G'day. Oh, wow, you haven't changed a bit.
What can I say? It's nice to hear from you.
Hello, no lawyer.
Well, we are brethren. It's okay. There's nothing wrong in that. Arnold, assuming this reaches a successful conclusion and America charges her, where would she serve her time and what flows from that?
I think the Supermax Penitentiary in Colorado, but, you know, if they find her, I don't care. Obviously, I don't care. But we're not really at that stage in this pursuit. She, you know, if you ask me, well, tell me about where she lives, I'd send you a videotape. I'd send you photographs of the outside and the inside. I'd send you pictures taken from the terrace down onto the street. And I remind you that she's a fugitive with a $5 million reward on her head. So something is very wrong with this story, even on its own terms. Yeah. And a show of hands, does anybody feel confident about answering, where does the $5 million reward on her head come from? I don't see any hands going.
Obviously not Israel.
Okay, so everybody's muted, so I'm not hearing any answers. So, all right, I'll just take those who don't know out of their misery. The $5 million award comes from, counterintuitively, the State Department, a unit called the Rewards for Justice Unit. On the day that we were told about the impending unsealing of the indictment against her, the person telling us, one of the Americans in the group, said, call me if you have any questions, and we left exhilarated. On the ride home, in speaking about it with Freedman, we thought to ask them, is there a reward on her head? And before I even asked them, I checked on the internet and visited for the first time the website of the FBI Most Wanted Terrorists list. Yesh kazeh davar. There is such a thing. It exists. There are 28 people on it. She's one of 28 most wanted terrorists, and she's one of only 2, and the other one has been there for decades, who are women. And lo and behold, she has no reward on her head. I went back to the guy from Washington. I said, you guys must have forgotten. And he wrote back to me an email, and he said, wasn't forgotten and not for lack of trying. And that led us into a whole journey of discovery in the State Department, which has the responsibility for the reward. And the short version of this is that having left a voice message, a very explicit voice message for the head of the Rewards for Justice unit at the time, and then another, and then an email, and a third email, and a fourth email. I've never gotten a response, even once, from the people who own the reward process. And really, all I want to say is, first of all, gee, it was really good of you to come up with a reward. I'm very pleased. It only took 9 months, which in the overall scheme of things is really acceptable. Of course, it's not, but it did take 9 full months with no negotiation, no pushback, no conversation with them at all. But for heaven's sake, $5 million for what? Do you not know where she lives? The entire population of Jordan, and all the journalists working there, and all the FBI agents, and all the US diplomats. Everyone knows where she lives. That's never been the issue. She's not a fugitive. You're the fugitives. You're running away from your responsibilities, and you're not explaining it. So you can see why I try to pick only certain issues of this rather difficult journey that we're on. Like the reward, I'm guessing that there are about 25 or 30 other issues where I would get just as violent palpitations in my chest as I'm having now, and just as unpleasant migraine throbbing in my head, which I've got now, because it's all about that. It has been from the beginning. No one has ever spoken to us from the government of Israel to either to help or to offer to help or to help us understand. And in the United States, it's a complicated story where we do have friends. We don't have too many friends in power, and it's all a matter of knocking on doors and being polite and trying to induce the public to take an interest in this. It's not easy, but that's our fate. That's what we're left to do.
Okay, now we're coming up to the official end of tonight's session. I imagine we'll stay behind a little bit longer, but just before we finally close off, we'll come back to your questions afterwards if you want to. There's just a couple of things we want to mention before we go tonight. If anybody's got the Australian Jewish News, there's an excellent no-holds-barred opinion piece in this week's edition by our Executive Director, Ted Lapkin. It's up on Facebook, and it's really quite a forthright piece. And I just want to ask Ted, it's well worth reading. Ted, just give the audience a little bit of an overview of what you were talking about.
Well, in a way, it has bearing on the rationale for the foundation of the AJA in 2017, and that was disquiet in the community over the combination of timidity and leftward slant taken by some of the establishment organizations. And that is the topic of my op-ed, which focuses in this case on the ZFA under its current leadership. Now, and I've made this point before to several people, but I think you can make an analogy between, the best analogy I can think of historically, between the AJA is the action by a personal hero of mine, a guy by the name of Zev Jabotinsky, who in 1935, he seceded from what now would be called the World Zionist Organization, then it was called the Zionist Organization, over the issue of the goal of creating a Jewish state in Palestine, political self-determination. Now, it may amaze you to hear it, but basically that was only the accepted position of the Zionist movement as of 1942 with the adoption of the Biltmore program. And so Jabotinsky went to, and his nemesis, his bête noire was Chaim Weizmann. He went with a demand that we need to have an explicit agenda that calls for the creation of a Jewish state. Ben-Gurion and Weizmann said no, and so he seceded and created the Zionist revisionist movement. And in a similar way, here we have the AJA, which is founded on kind of center-right conservative values, small government, maximal personal liberty, strong national defense, and Torah values. And those are issues, those are principles that unfortunately a lot of the other organizations have, from which they have gone astray, I guess I'll say. And so, yeah, I hope you read the op-ed. And if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to contact me.
You said that in a very nice way, Ted, but let me tell people, Ted takes aim at the Zionist Federation of Australia because of its leftward drift, and he does it beautifully. So by all means, have a look at the article. It's, as I said, it's no holds barred, but it says things that need to be said. Just to finish off the formalities for this evening, and then we can hang around and chat a little bit more with Arnold, whoever wants to. I'm going to ask David Adler, the president of the Australian Jewish Association, just to pass a vote of thanks and make some final remarks. David?
Thanks very much, Alan, and thanks particularly to you, Arnold. I don't know if you were watching the number of logins during this evening's session, but we had about a turnover of about 110 logins. Currently it's about 80, which means we probably had something around 150 people at peak, which is pretty good. It's more than the last events at AJAC and ZFA, by the way. Not that we're comparing.
It was. Of course we are.
I do want to make the point for Arnold's benefit that our previous guest last week was a Member of Parliament, Andrew Hastie, who happens to chair the Security and Intelligence Committee of the Australian Parliament. He's not a minister, but he's got this quite significant role. And we took advantage of his presence at our event to let him know that you would be the next guest and what the general subject was. So we think he's an ally, and he's a potential ally, and because he's not a minister and he's a person of principle, he does tend to speak his mind. We've seen him as one of the most outspoken members of Parliament on the matter of coronavirus and the Chinese responsibility. So that's something that we've done for you. I just want to say to everyone here, thank you for participating in tonight's event. If you're not yet a member of AJA, you should be. Make sure that we have your email address so we can add you to the list. Because of some of the reasons that Ted has alluded to, AJA now has the largest social media platform for a Jewish organisation in this country. But we don't have much in the way of resources, so any help is more than welcome. So follow our Facebook page and join the association if you can, and make sure we have your email address so that we can keep in touch. So that's really all I want to say, Alan, and thank you, Arnold, for all you're doing, and we hope to be able to provide a little bit of support here, and when we have face-to-face meetings, when things return to normal, hopefully later this year in Canberra, we will be sure to mention the issue.
Okay, thanks, David. Does anybody have any questions they would like to offer Arnold?
Yes, I do.
I'd like to ask something, if I could.
Yeah.
From memory, about 10 or 12 years ago, Israeli intelligence tried to poison, I think it was a Hamas operative within Jordan, and there was a diplomatic spat came out of that where the basis of it was that the Jordan king saw it that anyone within his territory is under his protection, so Israel's action was a disrespecting the king and the kingdom. Is there anything related to that in Israel's attitude to what's going on with your case?
You're talking, your name is Gary?
Gary, yes.
Okay. You're talking about Khaled Mashal, the very first official that Tamimi met when she got off the bus in Cairo on the day that she was released, was with Khaled Mashal, and pictures are all over the web. That was it didn't go well. It was catastrophic. Israel had to hand over the antidote, as I recall it, and to apologize profusely. But Israel is good at apologizing. Israel apologizes a great deal, certainly to the Jordanians. It's not everybody's cup of tea. There's probably a strong strategic reason to do it. It's certainly not a situation where you can have hard words with people like that. There's a certain strategy you need to take, and you need to take account of their culture and so on and so on. I'm glad I'm not a diplomat, and I'm glad I'm not involved in dealing with those guys. I much prefer doing what I'm doing, which is to try to bring as much discomfort into their world as I possibly can. But I can tell you that in a roundabout way, I've seen this up close. I used to do business in Jordan. I went to Jordan several times and had a business partnership. This is before Malki's murder, of course, with a prominent figure in the Jordanian establishment. And had some, well, I'll just give one small anecdote. Had some really extraordinary experiences there. I've been running technology companies since 1983, and I know the technology business. I'm a lawyer, and I've also worked as a lawyer through that time, but mostly it's been about technology. And together with a couple of partners, I suggested that there were some things that we could do that would benefit the Jordanians for sure, and that could produce some good results all round for the business. So we were brought into a meeting with some of the most senior technologists in the country, and it was just, I didn't know where to hide myself. All of us were just squirming with embarrassment because they're just coming from a completely different place with no concept of what ought to have been the issues that we were discussing there 20 years ago, 21 years ago. I say all of this not to be insulting to anybody, but to say that the cultural factors here are huge. When we use the word honor, kavod in Hebrew, we don't mean what they mean. For them, honor would be if Achlam Tamimi's father had cut her head off, which is apparently the procedure, because she had a baby. By the way, that child, I'm told, was handed off to one of her brothers and is probably now 21 or 22 years old and living in Jordan. Honor means something very different for them. And being able to deal with that requires skills that I surely don't have, but for the people who do it, I take off my hat. But it's not something that really is anything that any one of us would feel good about or even proud about. So I don't know how it's affected. I don't know how the failure of the Khalid Mashal assassination has affected Israel's ongoing strategy, nor I think do you expect me to know it, but it does highlight the complexity of dealing with well, it's not Switzerland, as you know. We're not neighbours of Switzerland. It's a much more challenging environment than that. But thanks for your question.
Yeah, I have a question.
Who's that?
Ted.
David Singer.
Arnold, have you had any connection?
Got to find your hand, I think.
Huh? No. David's got his screen blanked.
Oh, got you. Okay, fine.
I'm anonymous. Have you had any association or connection with Shurat Hadin?
Met them, know them. They're not involved.
Why?
I won't answer that here.
All
Come
right.
over here, we'll sit down over a cup of coffee and we'll have a serious discussion.
Okay.
Or even send me a note on thisongoingwar@gmail.com.
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Oh,
Mary's got a question.
Mary, I saw Mary. Just unmute yourself, Mary, and then I'll unmute you. Okay, ask your question.
No.
Mary?
She's muted.
She's muted.
I'm mute, yes.
Now there she is.
Now,
Thank you. Arnold, with the Taylor Force Act, has that been of any assistance, any help at all, since she had some American citizenship? Could not that have been some way of getting Congress to, or people in high places in America to support you?
It's a sharp question, Mary, and thank you. The answer is it's not really relevant to us. The Taylor Force Act, for those who aren't completely on top of this, enables the government of Israel and the government of the government of the United States, not the government of Israel, to withhold money to the extent that the Palestinians are investing money in terrorism. It hasn't really worked, and it probably never really had a chance. Those who were involved in lobbying for the law, some of them think it went out tremendously well and a huge success, and others say we messed this up from beginning to end. And I tend to be on the negative side of this. Our issues are not about money at this point, except for the money that's going to Jordan, and that's not affected by the Taylor Force Act at all. We are very keen, and we think that it will happen, to wave a big stick over the Jordanians' heads and say, you can do whatever you want, you can observe your rituals of honor, but if you do that, then we're going to make every effort to stop the flow of foreign aid to your country. This kind of touches on what David Singer just asked me. There are no legal measures that are missing in our profile. We've got all the legal ammunition in our pocket. What we need is political will. It's all very straightforward. There's probably 2 people, and maybe that's twice the number, who really need to make the decision. It's not just. I have a phone call, but I'm not going to pick it up. Excuse me. Okay. So, am I making the point? It's not about lawyers, and it's not about laws. We're really well equipped. We've got everything we need. She's on the FBI list. She's wanted. There's an extradition order. There's an arrest order. The Interpol are on her tail. But she's free as a damn bird. She is living a dream life over there. That's politics.
Ted to ask the last question, Ellen.
Yep.
Yeah. My question is, I guess, somewhat philosophical. And first of all, the line that I use when I'm talking about the difference of cultures, I quote from The Wizard of Oz. I don't know where we are, Toto, but I don't think we're in Kansas anymore.
Kansas. Right.
Yeah, but reminds me of a discussion I once when there was pressure to release Marwan Barghouti, and I was having a conversation with somebody, and I said, well, we wouldn't be having this discussion if Israel had capital punishment. The same for your situation. So just philosophically speaking, what's your view on the question of capital punishment for terrorists?
Philosophically speaking, I'm not in favor of capital punishment, and philosophically, I don't want to have a discussion about it because it never goes well, especially when we're thousands of miles apart. But if you're mentioning the son of a gun, Marwan Barghouti, he personally paid for the making. He personally, from his own pocket, paid for the making of the exploding guitar case. I sat through his murder trial in Tel Aviv in about 2004. It was an education. I think I learned more there than in my years at law school. He's a mean, evil son of a gun, and I don't understand any one of the Israelis who see him as some kind of a key to a better relationship with the Palestinian Arabs in the future. It will never happen. That's not who he is.
Okay. On that note, I think we'll close off for tonight. Arnold, thanks again, unofficially from me. Michael,
just one question. Just one question.
Yes.
I want people to know that for all the bitterness, the work that's done in Malki's name through the Malki Foundation brings a great deal of balm to our wounds. And I don't say that as an appeal. I'm not appealing. I'm helping people see some perspective here. Our lives are not bitter and twisted. We have, oh Hashem, we're blessed with children and grandchildren and a very happy life. Apart from the tragedy, we're happy people. But doing good every day, and I'm not involved in the running of the organization. I'm its honorary chairman, and Freedman plays an honorary role, and we've never taken money from the foundation. We put money into the foundation. It's a tremendous privilege to be able to look in the faces of some of these beasts that we have to deal with and think to ourselves, what do you do after breakfast? I'd like to tell you what we do after breakfast, and it involves doing good things for a lot of people. And a third of all of the beneficiaries over the years of the Malki Foundation have been non-Jews living here in Israel. You can complete that logic yourselves.
And the web address, Arnold?
www.malkifoundation.org.
Okay, and it's nice to finish on a positive note, and that was a positive note. Michael, good to be back in the chair with you.
Yes,
and,
yes, it is, Alan. And just for our audience, we will have Izzy Liebler, another Jerusalemite, coming up in the next few weeks. And also, we've got someone very interesting, one of probably the most Zionist organization in America, the ZOA, the Zionist Organization of America. We've got them coming up in June as well. So keep in touch with the AJA.
Okay, stay tuned, everybody. So on that note, I'll wish you all a good night, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you,
Night,
everybody.
everybody.
It's been wonderful.